Hey guys, it's Andy, aka Elogee, aka Elogee. I'm here today ready to talk about a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I've actually recently been asked by the legendary PokeTie90, aka TieGuy312, to talk about this topic, so I decided to actually commit to making a video about it. I'm going to be talking about Pokemon, and the series as a whole, as well as on my channel specifically. Ever since 2016, when my channel originated, Pokemon's pretty much been the primary focus of the channel, and that hasn't really been true for almost a year, I feel. I do still upload Pokemon content, like my playthroughs of games like recently Shining Pearl, but I feel like my channel really hasn't been focused on Pokemon the way it had been in the past, and I wanted to address that here today. It wasn't a conscious decision of mine for it to happen this way, it just kind of did. And I want to document what I believe happened in order to reach this conclusion. And I think we should start with the most apparent factor leading to this circumstance, and that is the fact that over the past 6 or so months, even longer than that, almost a year now, I've been completely addicted to Magic the Gathering. Magic has completely overtaken Pokemon when it comes to the primary competitive, skill-based, and I use heavy quotation marks for both of those, strategy game that, I focus a lot of time and energy on. Ever since really 2008, that part of my brain has been dedicated to competitive Pokemon. I spent so much time crafting teams out of my favorite Pokemon to use, deciding movesets, EV training. Then in 2013, when Pokemon X and Y came out, they introduced the PSS, which made competitive battling much more accessible than it had been in the past. That was when I really focused on competitive Pokemon as my primary skill-based hobby, if you will. X and Y was really where it began through the PSS, and it only got more intense from there. I started looking for more experienced opponents on Nintendo's Miiverse, and ended up making a lot of friends there in the process. And the point of no turning back was when I graduated from in-game Pokemon XY to Pokemon Showdown. That really opened the floodgates, eliminating all the fat you will and just focusing everything on the building and battling aspect, which is what I really craved. More so the building actually, but we'll get into that a little later. Once I really found my footing and got more comfortable in my battling and started uploading to the channel, I really thought I'd found a hobby for life. Pokemon, the series as a whole, played such an integral role in my childhood, and being able to translate that into something new, that being competitive battling, it just ticked a whole bunch of boxes for me and made everything feel right about what I was doing with my free time. I don't know how common this phenomenon is, if it's true for everyone, but when I reach a certain threshold for what I dedicate my time and energy into, I can't really turn it off, even when I'm doing other things. I'm constantly in the back of my mind thinking and building and craving competition all at the same time. It still affects me to this day, I'm constantly feeling that way about Magic, but the same way I feel about Magic now, I felt that way about Pokemon back then. Which was good, because back in that era, 2016, that was when I started my first draft league. Hey guys, this is post-editing Andy. I just remembered my first draft league was actually 2015, late 2015, so it's kind of the same era, but when I very first got into draft leagues, I wasn't as intense about my dedication to competitive battling as I was, 2016, which is when I started this channel and everything, so just wanted to clear up that a little mistake I made. I was doing this whole thing unscripted anyway, so it's not like I needed to interlude with this, but I just wanted to. And a big factor for getting into draft leagues and competitive battling for me as a whole, honestly, but more so draft leagues, was Mega Evolutions. Let me try to contextualize this a little further. After getting initially introduced to competitive Pokemon the tail end of Gen 4, I took a break from competitive Pokemon Gen 5, and I can honestly say I think Mega Evolution, in addition to the PSS and more general accessibility, led me to get back into competitive battling. It was such a unique and well-implemented new feature that it just reignited my spark for competitive battling. And as I was saying about draft leagues, back in the day, I'm going to sound so old, back in the day, we used to do draft leagues a little differently than the common way now of point distribution, in that you had to select a Mega Evolution like separately from the rest of your points. If you go way back, some of the draft leagues used Smogon's tiering system for how they rank their mons. That was a wild time, but back in that era, Megas were treated differently. And having so many options to effectively build your team around, build your roster around, that you could build your team weekly around, that was just so exciting. I've loved Mega Evolution ever since its inception, and the new team building possibilities about draft leagues and drafting a Mega and building a team specifically around it just did so much for me to scratch that itch to build. And ironically, it was right around this time when I started uploading to YouTube and getting more invested in draft leagues that I realized that I did get more enjoyment out of building than actually playing. Building is like an art form to me, expressing yourself in a way that still needs competitive viability and piecing together all the puzzle pieces perfectly. That, in hindsight, is what I really love most about games like Pokemon and Magic, being able to build and express yourself all while trying to build the optimal team or deck or whatever it is you're building to ultimately defeat your opponents. And this first became apparent to me during this era of draft leagues, when I realized I was looking forward to building and actually dreading the upcoming battle. You know, even when in draft leagues, when you're counter-teaming your opponent before you battle them, there's just some things you can't prepare for, that being the luck element inherent in Pokemon. Hacks is, of course, everyone's go-to point for how Pokemon is bad and no skill, all luck-based, but hacks never really bothered me to the level it bothered other people. What really got to me, and I could never bring myself to get over, was the fact that there was so much prediction involved, and your choices arbitrarily came down to whether you guessed right or wrong, and that wasn't always easy to do because your opponent could make the objectively bad play and come out ahead because you predicted them to not do that, and that always frustrated me to no end with competitive Pokemon, and I believe that's what ultimately turned me away from the whole experience. It was definitely a contributing factor, but the building blocks for this definitely displayed themselves the most during this era for me. Comparing it now in hindsight to a game like Magic, Pokemon is such a weird game solely because of the fact that you and your opponent make your moves at the same time, and you aren't able to see if your move was correct or not until both moves have been selected. So yeah, I do think fundamentally competitive Pokemon is just a little weird. It's unusual, and not that I don't like it, but if I'm going to invest in a skill-based hobby, it would rather be something like Magic. At least that's how I feel now. Getting back to what I was saying, this is the era where I realized that I enjoyed building more than battling. And immediately following that era of Oris, which was the glory days, I feel, of my involvement in competitive Pokemon, immediately after that came Sun and Moon, which was a very strange time. Sun and Moon fundamentally, I felt, took so many steps backwards. It was so strange to witness. The removal of the PSS in favor of the Festival Plaza was so baffling, and I think everyone can agree, and I will never get over it, just how big of a step backwards that felt. However, by this point, I was so invested in Showdown that I didn't really care as much about in-game, but that was just the starting point. Like the PSS and hoping that would get expanded only to not be expanded and instead be reverted into the Festival Plaza, they completely dropped support for Mega Evolution. There were still a few Megastones in the game, and a few, because they didn't release all of them right when the game came out. They had to release them later through DLC. But yeah, there were no new Megas, which was an immediate disappointment, because, like I said, that was the feature that got me back into competitive battling. Instead of Mega Evolutions, they'd focused their efforts on new features, primarily Z-moves, which replaced, effectively, Mega Evolutions in that it was the primary region-focused new gimmick that would shake up competitive Pokemon the same way Mega Evolutions had done in Gen 6. However, where Gen 6 was fun and interesting, I felt Z-moves really did not need to exist, especially in a way that replaced Mega Evolution. There was just absolutely no need for it. But despite all this, I did put in my best effort to enjoy Gen 7 both in-game and competitively. And I believe I succeeded in that regard. I did get some fair enjoyment out of both, although I felt like fundamentally something was just missing. I got hardly any enjoyment out of battling or even team building for standard OU laddering, instead devoting my entire time and energy into my draft leagues, which I was becoming more involved in at kind of an alarming rate. This era is when I was first beginning to feel overload from draft leagues. The overload became so bad that I no longer looked forward to building weekly in addition to battling. The only enjoyment I was getting out of draft leagues was the initial draft and constructing your full team. I no longer liked building weekly, I no longer liked battling. It was just something I was doing without realizing how much I really didn't enjoy it. No, I think I did realize it, because I noticed I went from taking an hour or so every week to build, dropping down to like 30 minutes and less, just because I didn't want to do it anymore. And this did affect my performance in the draft leagues, but at that point I was so drained, I really didn't care anymore. I was just hoping Gen 7 would be done. And now I have really nothing but bad memories, bad feelings about that whole era. Which is sad, because I know there was definitely some good things about Gen 7 and those games, but for the most part, I'm just flooded with negative emotions surrounding that era, so let's just move on to Gen 8 now. Hi guys, it's Editing Andy again. Just thought I'd pop in to mention that between Gen 7 and 8, Let's Go came out, and that was actually the beginning of fond memories for me. More so moving away from draft leagues and being overwhelmed by competitive battling, and more so just enjoying the game. I was going through some stuff emotionally at that point in my life, and wasn't really invested as much in spending time on a hobby invested in like skill-based strategy or whatever, and I could really appreciate in-game Pokemon more than I had been able to do for years. Especially because it was Kanto Gen 1, which is what I grew up with, and I was heavily nostalgic for it. And that's why I was generally a lot happier when I did a playthrough of it for the channel. That was the first playthrough of a Pokemon game I did, and like I said, I just had fond memories of that time, and I think the Let's Go playthrough is a good transition period from being overloaded with competitive battling into, I guess, the precursor to where we are now. So we'll get back to non-post editing Andy. Gen 8 came out in 2019, and this was a point in my life where I was distinctly different from the previous generation, just going through a lot of personal stuff, but I was still excited for Sword and Shield until I realized that they were eliminating the majority of the Pokédex, along with all support for Mega Evolution, for these flagship titles on the new Switch system. At this point on the channel, I was focused less on competitive battling, and I actually uploaded some opinion-based videos how I felt about, these changes, the removal of the decks, megas, and stuff. These are videos you can find on my channel, which I'll leave link to in the description if I remember, just so I won't have to reiterate how I felt here. Basically, it just led to even further disappointment with the state of competitive battling, just because everything at this point just felt completely disconnected from the way competitive battling used to feel for me. So I spent very little time trying to get invested into competitive Sword and Shield. I dabbled in OU 2 or 3 times trying to use Dracovish, Tyranitar, Aegislash. That's all I really remember about OU. And I think I was in 1, maybe 2 draft leagues throughout the entirety of Gen 8. By this point, I had become just about entirely disconnected from competitive battling. I was instead focusing a lot of my effort onto my playthrough. That was like the first time I did face cam for a playthrough, and I was putting a lot of effort into it, which didn't really pan out because my playthroughs get hardly any views, but I was still enjoying them way more than competitive battling. However, the last draft league that I was in, I reached a point where I realized, okay, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Let me put some effort back into this and see if I can actually make something happen. That was midway through Season 6 of the NNDL. If you go back on my channel, you can see content throughout the NNDL. The early history, me and my friends used to do hours-long recaps of each week. I think that also contributed to how much it drained me, but I digress. Midway through Season 6, I was like, okay, let me buckle down, actually take time, see if I can reverse my losing record, and actually make this a season to be worthy of being my final season. I went back to spending at least an hour to prepare for each remaining week, and to my satisfaction, my record did improve to the point where I found myself in the finals of the NNDL Season 6. And in case you haven't seen this battle, I'll leave a link to my live reaction to it in the description if I remember. Though I'll be sure to remember this one because this is absolutely a good video. I definitely recommend you checking it out. I think you could do a character study of me side by side looking back at my older live recordings. You can see how focused I was on this game and how it ultimately led to my victory. I believe it is one of my best played games and one of my best built teams I've ever showcased, and I was so satisfied to actually emerge victorious as the champion in that battle and have it be ultimately my final legacy in my draft league repertoire. I definitely needed a break from competitive Pokemon after that. I thought about trying to get back into it, but I realized how comfortable I was on that break and decided that competitive Pokemon wouldn't be something that I actively invest in again. There was just too much missing. It just felt too disconnected from the time when I enjoyed it. And admittedly, I'd also gone through some changes, and I just legitimately didn't enjoy the game as much anymore. But I feel like I could have still held out hope if the game more closely resembled what made me enjoy it when I did enjoy it. Competitive Pokemon was no longer what it was, and even Pokemon as a whole just felt so disconnected in a way. It might have been because of the removal of the Pokedex and the introduction of regional variants, or the overwhelming release schedule. I think it just all culminated into me feeling so disconnected from the series, both competitively and in terms of the main games. Regional variants was another huge disappointment of Gen 7. I just felt like it was a lazy mechanic, one that didn't need to exist, especially having not existed up until Gen 7. It felt extra sloppy. I felt like you could just leave old Pokemon as they were, or give them new evolutions or new Mega Evolutions if you're going to update old Pokemon. The new regional variants could just be new Pokemon. That's how I felt ever since Gen 7, and now it seems Gen 8.5, Pokemon Legends Arceus, I feel like a big turnoff for me was, aside from being a side game that I just didn't generally have much interest in to begin with, I think having regional variants pushed so much dissuaded me from getting the game. I still haven't even gotten the game. I've thought about it, I just haven't had the ambition to do so. Everyone tells me it's a great game, but I still haven't played it, don't really have a desire to play it. And that also ties in with the extreme release schedule. Ever since 2016, they've been releasing a game, which I've always felt was way too much. I think it's funny now that I'm invested in Magic. A big complaint in the community is that there's product fatigue, that they're releasing too many new Magic sets too frequently. And I've felt that way about Pokemon ever since 2016, so I didn't even recognize that that was something others could feel until the Magic community communicated that sentiment, so clearly. I just used to think I was the only one who felt that way. Now it seems like that is a legitimate criticism that someone can have, so I feel more valid in that regard, the way I feel about Pokemon as a whole. And ultimately now, going into Gen 9, I think it comes out in like a month or a month and a half, less than that. I don't even know. I'm not the most excited. I'm not going to pretend to be, but I am going to get the game, and I am going to play through it on the channel, and most likely I am going to enjoy it. However, if Pokemon continues this trajectory of a constant release schedule, promoting new gimmicky features and mechanics, and replacing old beloved ones, doubling down on regional variants instead of making new Pokemon, I think it's going to culminate into me no longer enjoying Pokemon as much. Now, right now, I feel pretty good about Pokemon, just not as excited as I used to be, I feel. I recently played through Pokemon Shining Pearl, and I knew going into that I would be way more excited about that than like Legends Arceus or even Gen 9. And so far that has been true, even with the criticisms I've had with Shining Pearl. I still felt like that was overall a very good experience. I'm very glad I did a playthrough of that on the channel, even though again, that time and effort I spent wasn't really well received because my playthroughs hardly get any recognition on the channel, but I still enjoy playing the game, I still enjoy making that content, so I'm still going to do it for anyone still watching this video that might enjoy it. So if you are looking forward to me playing through Gen 9, don't worry, I will play through it for the channel, so yeah, look forward to that. I do think right now, the only thing Pokemon related that would legitimately excite me would be the announcement of a Let's Go to Johto. Johto was my favorite game, Pokemon Silver, growing up. It was so nostalgic for me. I love the Johto region, the Johto Pokemon, everything about Gen 2 I love. And like I said, I liked the original Let's Go, Eevee and Pikachu, and I feel like I would especially love a Let's Go continuation, Let's Go to Johto, as a new generation of remakes. I know a lot of people don't like remakes, but honestly, it's one of the only things still keeping me invested in the games. As the newer games seemingly continue to devolve in terms of my expectations, the remakes continue to ground my expectations for the series and rekindle my enjoyment for it. And after, oh boy, 25 or so minutes, I think I've said all I needed to say about this topic. I have so many backlog video ideas of Pokemon related content that I wanted to do, like finish making my top 10 list of each generation. I have so many more list ideas written down that I wanted to do. My Make a Mega series is completely canned. That dream is dead in the water. There's a lot more Pokemon content I wanted to do, but lately I've just felt so disconnected from the series that I haven't felt that spark to continue making Pokemon content. That may change in the future, but for right now, I just haven't felt that ambition to make Pokemon content. So for those of you still watching, if that is something you're interested in seeing, definitely be sure to let me know, and I'll try my best to get it out. And who knows, it might re-spark some interest I have for the series. So yeah, definitely let me know how you feel about what I said in this video. If you disagree with anything I've said throughout this whole 30 minutes, essentially. I hope you like the footage I've been playing in the background of me and the goat Poketai trying to take out this den here. But yeah, to summarize what I've had to say, I pretty much don't have any interest in competitive Pokemon anymore, and that was really what had such a strong grasp on my interest in Pokemon overall, was my dabbling in competitive. And now that that's no longer there, I have considerably less interest in the series overall, but I still like Pokemon. I will still make videos of Pokemon. So I hope this has been a satisfactory explanation of why there's been less Pokemon content on my channel and how I feel about it as a whole. So like I said, hope you guys enjoy the video. If you'd like to see more Pokemon content, definitely be sure to let me know. And either way, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna go play some Magic. You guys be sure to have a good day, alright? I'll see you around.